circles and lines. Make up the alphabet sounds of all kinds. Put them together and you can spell words. You can make any words you've ever heard. You can use letters.
We are at 3, 2, 1, Rich Learning Live Tuesdays at 2 with Dr. Mariale Hardiman from Johns Hopkins. Welcome, welcome. Who are you?
Thank you so much.
How did you get to do what you're doing? Where did you come from? And how'd you
It's a
get it?
really long story, Rich. I'd have to spend like 2 hours telling you, but I'm gonna try to do it in 5 minutes. But I just
Okay.
really want to say first that I have reread in preparation for today, Rich Learning, your book. And every piece of that book is everything that we do. And it's so relevant. And honestly, it's so much fun. You know, those of us at universities kind of write in an academic way because we have to, but that book is fun. It's lovely. And so they're going to be hearing a lot about things that you've written about that I've researched, right? So me. So I come from a family of 8 children, and I'm probably about the only one who has no artistic ability whatsoever. Although I've learned to salsa dance, so maybe that's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But I have brothers and sisters who are great at music or visual arts. Not all 8 of us, but most of them. So it's weird that here I'm the one out there promoting the arts, but I'll tell you how I got there. I became a school principal in Baltimore City Schools. And when No Child Left Behind was enacted, our curriculum went straight to you've got to nail those test scores, right? Kids
Yep.
have to learn how to fill in the bubbles. And we weren't doing that kind of instruction before. So I knew, we became a school that was just about the test scores, and that was not fun for the kids. It wasn't fun for me either. So that's when the brain targeted teaching model, which was my first and second book, and I'm rewriting it into the third book. It's Brain Targeted Teaching for 21st Century Schools is the second book. That will be rewritten. So in 2003, my first book came out on brain targeted teaching, and my second book in 2012, and then the third will be out in 2025. And it's all about a holistic approach to learning. And so as we designed the 6 targets, I realized that we could not do this work without integrating the arts into what we were doing. So I adopted the practice of arts integration. And I will tell you that it was, no, well, let me back up. I first expanded the arts education that we were doing in our school, more music, more visual arts, theater, so, discrete arts programs. We also expanded the cultural experiences that kids were having, going to museums, bringing in art educators or art artists just to do programs in schools. But I realized that wasn't enough because they were getting lots of art outside of the classroom, but in the classroom, it was business as usual. And I thought, they're spending most of their day as business as usual. So I realized that arts integration, that is using the arts as a teaching tool, which is a lot of what your book and work is about, was really going to be where we needed to go. So once we implemented arts integration, the school changed amazingly. I mean, learning became visible. Learning became visible. Instead of 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper on the walls in the hall with like check plus or good work or star, it was students' artwork that was demonstrating what they were learning. It was just beautiful all over the school. We started having artists come in, and almost every wall was painted with murals. I mean, the school just became exploding with the arts. And what did it do? Well, it just made learning more visible and fun for the kids, frankly. I also noticed more collaboration because a teacher would walk past another teacher's room or what they had displayed in the hall. And it was K-8 school, 1,500 kids, big school, right? In Baltimore City. And so like a 7th grade teacher would say to a 4th grade teacher, well, I'm teaching that too. Why don't we come together and, our kids can collaborate. So it fostered collaboration. And then parents, when they asked the kids, what did you do in school today? Instead of hearing, nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing, right? That's a good say. The kids would describe these like fun experiences. And so the parents started to become more engaged. So it really did make the school just a more joyful place for learning, and people were knocking at the door from everywhere to get into that school. It was amazing. The school test scores, even though we implemented arts integration, did not go down, which is what a lot of people predict. Oh yeah, well, if you do that, you can't do this. So, but guess what? We became a blue ribbon school of excellence. Even though we were integrating the arts, or probably because
you were integrating the arts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our test scores kept going up and up and up. And eventually became also a model school from the Kennedy Center for the arts. So, it just brought so much to the school. Okay, fast forward. I get my doctorate at Johns Hopkins University, and they recruited me, and finally I gave in and reluctantly left that wonderful school, because I realized that at Johns Hopkins I would have a larger platform for being able to take this work forward. And indeed, that was the case. We created the Mind Brain Teaching Program, the NeuroEducation Initiative, and really brought the idea of, how the brain works to educators in a translational way. And, I'll talk about that in a minute, but I have to say that getting back to the arts again, I was so lucky that I was able to get first a grant from a California foundation, and secondly, a grant from the US Department of Ed to actually study the arts. Because besides noticing what I just told you, the third thing I didn't tell you is that teachers told me, when we implement the brain targeted teaching model and arts integrated units, the kids seem to remember the information better. At the end of the year, they're coming back and say, oh, remember that unit we did on genetics? Well, I still remember. And I'm thinking, okay, there's something here. And, so it was anecdotal for me as a principal. I'm seeing this happening, but I thought, here's my chance to really research it, and research it in a way that a lot of researchers can't do, because I had just been a school principal. My dissertation was a randomized control trial. And that's the only way to say that this causes that, right?
Right.
It's correlational. If you can randomize. So having just left Baltimore City Schools, I had lots of friends that let me randomize in their schools. So I had access to schools that allowed me to randomize. So I did 2 studies, and they both produced the same results. We did control, which was science units that were very active learning, good science units without the arts, and then science units with the arts, matched, same content, but with the arts. And every child had a chance to do both. They did one subject with the arts and a second subject then the next month without the arts, or vice versa. It was pretty intricate the way that it was designed. But bottom line, arts integration, yes. It was in long-term retention, it dominated over traditional instruction. And we saw a lot of things happening there. When I'll show you, when I show you the slides, I'll show you the research, the order effect that we saw. But it was really pretty amazing. And it helped then to spur, we couldn't find any randomized controlled trials on arts integration when we started this work. There have been replications since, and they're finding sort of the same thing we did. So my prediction was that we did pre, post, and delayed testing. At post-test, I thought there's not going to be any difference because when kids memorize work, they remember it. They can take the test. Boom. Okay, that's what they learned. But learning is really remembering down the road, right? So that's long-term retention. So 10 weeks later, we did delayed testing, and that's what we were looking at, the difference between post-test, what they learned, and then delayed test, what they remembered. So when you see the results, keep that in mind.
Interesting.
And since then, I just continue to do my work in arts integration, and you'll see that I'm doing some really fun work right now with Baltimore City Schools and the brain targeted teaching model. So I think that's probably enough, right?
So you went from a teacher to a principal. You developed the brain targeted teaching. Can you give me a minute on what exactly is brain targeted teaching?
Okay, it's teaching targeted to how we think and learn. And I did not like the term brain-based learning. And I will tell you that my Hopkins professor said that's ridiculous, like all learning occurs in the brain. And I said, well, you know what? Sure, but not all teaching results in learning. So this is teaching targeted to how the brain thinks and learns. There's 6 components of it: the emotional connection to learning, the physical learning environment, big picture concepts, planning lessons where kids see the big picture, teaching for mastery, and doing it through what we know from neuro and cognitive science works for memory. How does it stick? How do we not have to reteach things? That's where arts integration comes in. Actually, arts integration is all through it, but it really is very strong there. 5, teaching for application, and that's creativity and problem solving. I've just been doing research and work on creativity. And then finally, evaluation as a tool, like the artist portfolio. That evaluation isn't just like catch what kids know or don't know, but like how do you use evaluation assessment for learning. So that's the brain targeted teaching model, and every one of those 6 targets are connected to research from the learning sciences.
So you started with the emotion, and I always like to say you got to open the kid before you open the book. What do the emotions have to do with learning?
Everything. Emotions are a filter for cognition. And when teachers would say to kids, leave your emotions at the door, you're here to learn, I'd say, that's not gonna work. So, you know, I just saw as the principals, frankly, the difference from one teacher to the next in terms of how well they were able to get their content across. And it had to do with the connection to kids. You know, the teacher that the kids didn't connect with at all, I had more behavior problems in those classrooms, frankly, and their grades weren't as good. But those same kids going into a classroom where the teacher was just warm and understood the kids and they loved her, those same kids excelled and never a behavior problem. So I realized then, oh my goodness, that climate is the key. And you can't, you've got to open that door before you can do anything else.
So you mentioned long-term retention. You get immediate attention when you use the arts, and retention from a molecular and cellular and structural basis. What do the arts do that just ingesting through your linguistic and phonics centers above your left ear don't do?
Well, right now, we're really focused on the idea that executive function skills are really vitally important. And that comes from the frontal lobe, as you know, the executive part of our brain. But that's not all of it. The next thing that we talk about a lot, that is all through your book, is embodied cognition. And that is movement within the environment. So executive function and embodied cognition are concepts that have to do with how we process information. But for a classroom teacher, it's like, okay, so I know this, but how do I make it work? I mean, I teach 10th grade biology. What does that mean to me? And what I say is, if you are integrating the arts into your content, you're getting there. You're getting there. And you're using all the modalities. You're using music, which your book goes into in great depth about how important that is. You're using movement, which is critically important. I love your chapter on ADHD, by the way. You're using the visual arts. And so the modalities are all coming together. We say in neuroeducation, learning styles don't exist, and that's true. I mean, you don't need to slice up your lesson for visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learners. You pull it all together, and the arts do that.
So would Gardner even break the modalities? Now, knowing what we know today, would everybody learn better with everything? Would he agree with that?
I think he would. I mean, he's come out and said, look, I didn't create learning styles. Don't blame me. I just show different ways of thinking. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Because I was just with some folks from another country, and it's like they just discovered Gardner and are saying, okay, we have to break down. These are the kinesthetic, these people were in Israel. These are the kinesthetic learners. These are the this, these are the that. And they think they've just discovered something. So
no, tell them to read Pashler, Willingham, and a randomized control trial by Rogoski and Talal and others that have shown that learning styles don't exist. That is, now, let me just say this real quickly. When I'm in front of an audience and I say, how many of you believe in learning styles? Most of the hands go up because they've been taught that, right?
Yeah.
And I say, okay, so keep your hand up. If you go home every night and you write one lesson plan for your kinesthetic learners, another one for your visual learners, and another one for your auditory learners, and the hands go down and they start to giggle. And I say, see, you really don't believe it, or you would do it.
Okay.
And then what I say is, teachers, you do what intuitively is right, and it is right. You combine modalities, and it depends on what the kids are learning. If they're learning map skills, they're in the visual modality. If they're learning language skills, they're in the auditory. So, you know what to do. You don't need to slice it up.
So one more definition, and then I want to know what you're excited about working on right now. This whole summer is going to be about neuroeducation and the arts. And I think people understand the arts, but what's neuroeducation? You're on a subway and somebody finds out you started the NeuroEducation Initiative. What is that?
Yeah. So if you might remember, the 90s were the decade of the brain, and lots of research was done. Lots of money came in from the federal government to researchers. And so a lot of neuro fields developed after that: neuro law, neuroaesthetics, neuroeconomics, neuroleadership, and neuroeducation. And of all those neuro fields, I felt neuroeducation teachers needed to know how we think and learn more than anybody else, really. So neuroeducation is looking at that broad interdisciplinary field. It's not just neuroscience, although it does include some components of that, but it's experimental psychology, cognitive psychology, looking at all the sciences that are studying learning, whether it's biological or behavioral or both. And it's bringing it to teachers. That's not typically part of teacher preparation programs. So it's an initiative to help teachers understand you need to know the learner. Sure, you need to know curriculum. You need to know education theory, probably, maybe not. And you need to know instructional techniques and behavior, probably. But at the core of all that, you need to know the child. You need to know how children think and learn and how they best think and learn. So
So
that's neuroeducation in a nutshell.
So with PET scans and fMRIs, we have a window into the learning brain today.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you toward the end about just practical applications, but in the big picture, what do we see from we've learned more in the last 10 years than the last 4,000 years, probably, because we do have this window into the learning brain. What do we see the arts do in the whole brain, body, and environment, again, that isn't simply ingested through the linguistic and phonic centers of the left ear?
I think you just said it through your question, and that is it engages the whole brain really in ways that, sitting in a desk and filling out a worksheet, and believe me, that is still happening a lot in schools today, probably even more so, believe it or not. So the arts are going to engage the brain in ways that probably traditional instruction doesn't do as much. That's what the arts contribute.
Well, you brought some slides today. I'm going to go grab them and tell us what you're excited about right now. What are you doing? Where are you going? And what's going to happen soon with the legacy of your work?
Okay. Yeah, so I do a lot of workshops with teachers and others on how the arts integration supports. But I said before, I talked about executive function and embodied cognition, and it really results in holistic learning. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see what, yeah. So I want people to understand that there's components to the arts, there's arts education, and that's critically important, and arts integration shouldn't replace it. So children need discrete classes in the arts, whether it's a music or art. And unfortunately, they're the first to be cut and still are. We're still dealing with that. Many places have arts and cultural experiences where kids go to museums or they go to concerts. And if you don't live in an area where you have access to that, you can bring it in, especially now through the internet. So arts integration is where my focus has been. And as I said earlier, you can have the first two, but if teachers are teaching traditionally, that's where kids are spending most of their time. So my focus, and that's the hardest of all three, because you're asking a teacher who has a content knowledge in, say, reading or math or biology or social studies. You're asking them to integrate a discipline that they haven't been trained in. And it's really important that we know how to do it the right way, and that arts integration doesn't just become unmeaningful crafts, right? Teachers need to understand how the arts can support the content they're teaching. And so that takes time and it takes training. So the next slide will talk about what we're doing with that in Baltimore City right now. I'm on a project with a nonprofit called Arts Every Day, and we call it the Baltimore Arts Integration Project. So we're using the brain-targeted teaching model that I described earlier, infusing it with arts integration, the visual and performing arts, and using Baltimore City curriculum. So there's an example of a curriculum. It's first grade. And you can see their driving question, what can we learn from plants and animals? So it's taking content that the teachers are actually teaching now and infusing it, overlaying into that unit that the teachers are required to teach. The brain-targeted teaching model, paying attention to the environment, for example, writing, making concept maps, etc., all that I talked about. And then pairing a teacher with an artist, and you can see here there's a teacher and an artist together. They write these units, and the artist comes with the pedagogy of the arts, and the teacher comes with the content knowledge of the curriculum. So if you go on, I'll give you an example. I'll just quickly show the next slide.
Before we go there, I want to go back to the brain-targeted model and the icons. Emotional climate, physical environment, learning design, teaching for mastery, teaching for application and evaluation of learning.
Yep.
And then the logos in the middle, what are these, each of these logos, different ways of expressing what you're
Yep.
teaching?
Just are we with the brain targeted teaching, or are you in the middle, the visual?
I'm in the middle now.
Okay, so that just shows you just different
Yep.
aspects of the visual and performing arts, just icons that take into consideration.
Yep. And
And
are the
then-
kids shooting their own little movies on their iPhones and such?
Oh, they're doing all kinds of things. It depends on the grade level. It just depends on the content. Year
Okay.
one, we worked with language arts teachers. This is year two now. We're working with
Okay.
science teachers. And this summer, we'll start year three working with social studies teachers.
Marvelous, marvelous. Okay, we'll go to the next slide here.
The next slide just shows an example of what teachers can do. This is a science unit for first graders. And you can see the activities. Now, there's a lot on this slide, but I'm just going to quickly deconstruct it for you. Activity one, the kids are doing plant and dance songs. So they're actually singing and rapping to and making movements to emulate the parts of a plant. That's what they're learning here. And
Okay.
the second thing, they're using Tableau. So now we're in activity two at the other part. Tableau is a frozen gesture, right? So, you know, what do they need? What do plants and animals need? Food, water, space, and air. How can you use your body to depict those needs? If you go down below, you'll see that we keep visual journals all the time. Every arts integrated lesson, the kids are visually writing out their vocabulary. They're doing little sketching. I was in a classroom once and a little girl put her arms like this and said, I can't do this. And I said, well, why can't you do it? She said, I can't draw. And I said, okay, then let me ask you a question. Can you doodle? She said, everybody can doodle. I'm like, okay, then just doodle, don't draw. You know, language, right? So
Yeah.
she produced some really good work because she doodled. Then the next is the kids produced trading cards. I thought that was so creative.
Brilliant.
Yeah, they made avatars for their favorite animal, and then they traded the cards. I mean, just how much fun that was, but how much they learned, right? I mean, they had to classify and characterize the habitat and adaptation of their favorite animal, and then trade them so that they could learn about other people's favorite animals. And then they went into something called biomimicry, which is like a concept that you would think, oh my gosh, would first graders know this? But you think about Velcro, and Velcro is an example of biomimicry. You know, it was like, you know, a researcher walking through the woods and seeing how things stuck together, and then realized, oh, molecularly, we could do that. We can make that. So Velcro is an example of biomimicry. Da Vinci, you know, looked at how birds fly and created what we know he's created, you know, with the helicopter, et cetera, an example of biomimicry. So the kids learned about that and then created a fashion show and made biomimicry clothes. So that's just an example. So we'll go on to the next one.
I do love the idea that there's a show at the end.
Oh yeah.
To do it is one thing, but back to Glasser in the quality school, everyone's a teacher. It's yeah, I'm not just learning this to learning this, I'm learning it to share it and teach it. And I think, and the word education, Duke, is really to lead out. It's not just to cram in. And if all we do is cram in and nothing comes out, I think intellectual constipation results. We don't need any more constipation.
And that is Brain Target 5. And that's why we use the Brain Targeted Teaching model, because Brain Target 5 is that you have to apply knowledge. You have to do something real in a creative way with what you've learned, or you really haven't learned it.
Right.
And
Marianne
you
Wolf,
make that point in your book.
Yeah, Marianne Wolf, who from Tufts, who was one who taught me. I was dyslexic in my 50s. She looked at rich, RICH learning, and we know recognize, identify, comprehend, but it's not until you harness it.
You got to harness it.
Got to harness it.
You don't really have it.
Right. All right. What do we got here?
So the next one is just land art and how the kids used land art in various ways to generate ideas and collaboration. Let's go to the next one. I want to show you that real fast because I know we're running like a little short here.
Yep, we'll
The
take
next,
questions
the,
in just a
the,
minute.
the next slide just shows like you can do this with little people and big people too. I mean, this is just kindergarten, forces of motion, and how they use dance movements to push and pull, to show push and pull and force and speed and turning, all through dance. This whole thing about motion was done through dance. Next slide. If you think it's only for children, this is one of my colleagues at Johns Hopkins. He's a professor in biostatistics and bioinformatics, and he uses the brain targeted teaching model. This is his concept map, and his students have to do an art project around the data. They have to pick a category of data and do an art project around the data. Next slide is, so what's the research findings? And the next slide, I'll show you, well, you can just show, those are my journal articles that show my research. This is in Mind, Brain, and Education. Next slide is.
We can post this PDF on
Sure.
our website. Yep.
Okay. But the next slide so that's the next article. That's our 2 articles. What I wanted to show you though is that, you know, I said before, every child had either arts integration first or control, which was traditional first. You can see here how arts integration, the students did better. Students who did arts integration did better with the content than the control. So the control is the purple. Yep. in the first one. So that reverses now in the second one. And you can see everybody does better the second time around. So that's probably normal. Everybody's a little bit more used to the units. But if you can see in the purple group, obviously they go from control to doing so much better in arts integration when they have that. The yellow group also, you know, you can see that they, arts integration does better both times. But the yellow group does pretty darn well in control second time around if they had arts integration first. So we thought, okay, so what is happening here? Why are they doing better in control, so much better in control than when we did control in the first quarter? So we started talking to the teacher.
They're thinking artistically.
Amen. Amen. You nailed it. So the teacher said, well, the kids were using the strategies they learned in arts integration, even when they were being taught in a traditional way. They were humming, they were singing, they were drawing. Oh my goodness. So I get back to like Project Zero and the idea that the arts create dispositions. You can go to the next slide and see that arts create certainly the kids at the lower levels of achievement really soared in terms of retaining more content. Kids at the top level, well, they learn pretty well anyway, that they can learn, but that's normal, right? But the kids that needed more really soared. And so I asked this question: can the arts become a lever of school reform rather than a victim of it? Because it is right now a victim of school reform. We are all about, let's tutor kids, tutor, give them more of what they're not good at in ways that they're not good in learning. The other thing is that we think, from the data I just showed you, that it definitely, we think it supports thinking dispositions, meaning that kids are acquiring arts-based skills even when taught through traditional methods. And then we think that the arts promote so many things besides what we studied, and that is agency, engagement, and creative thinking and problem solving. So I think we're ready for questions.
All right, we'll get rid of this. This was really helpful, and we'll put that article with the actual results in case anybody has to prove that they're not just playing around, you're actually doing great for the brain. All right, let's see, how do I get back to my regular thing here? So the first question was about science projects in the arts. Let me go back to chat. We had Jonathan Swenson, who's an artist on stage and everything. Can you give an example of science projects without and with the arts as an element?
Yes. So science was the content we used in our study. So we wrote 4 science units. This is the one I love to talk about and show people when I do presentations, and that's the states of matter. So in the control, students were learning about the states of matter because they were reading it out of a textbook, and they were writing, they were doing worksheets that you would traditionally do. In the control, in the arts integration, they were using their bodies to show how solid molecules are packed together, and you can see the kids coming together in like really tightly packed. And then for water, they moved out and they all held hands. And then for gas, they did dance poses. So, they're going to remember that because they did those poses much better, I believe, than, and our data showed, than when they just wrote it out on a worksheet. So there's one example of science content.
You use their whole body as a learning tool then.
Correct.
We have Ken Great Batch in London saying neuroeducation, ideally for remedial learning, and for what age? Is there an age?
Every age. We all need to know from, those who are with little people, those who are with college age students. Actually, the audiences I've been presenting to mostly are college professors who know their content really well, but don't know quite well how to teach. And, they're finding that neuroeducation is giving them strategies that they were never exposed to. And then right now, we're really working with leaders in industry, because a lot of them are, corporate trainers. One of our students, for example, works with the company that does power plants, nuclear power plants. And there's a lot of information that when they bring in a new crop of people to learn about this, they have to learn quickly, they have to retain it, and they have to be able to think critically on their feet. Boom. So what we're finding is that the concepts of neuroeducation are applying everywhere, in leadership, in corporate training, in preschool, everywhere.
Another question. I gather a lot of your students at Johns Hopkins are Chinese. Is there any evidence that the Chinese system is moving toward neuroeducation, maybe faster than us?
Well, it's interesting because I do teach in a program called ITGL, International Teaching and Global Learning. So last fall, I had 221 Chinese students in my class. And I will have to tell you that they just absorb this stuff. They want it so much. And they do tell me that that's not the way I'm teaching them in the brain targeted teaching model. They do tell me that's not how they learned, but it's not how I learned either, right? It's been great to have those students in my class. Actually, I've got 2 Chinese students volunteering to be my research assistants, and they're just rocking it.
So this question isn't on the board, but I've often wondered why so many graduate students at Stanford and Berkeley and NYU and everywhere else who grow up using both sides of their brain to read, because kanji and the Chinese letters from the very, very beginning, Marianne Wolf taught me this with her brain scans at the early reading lab at Tufts. In the half a second it takes the light to go from the eye to the back of the brain to hopping over to the left brain to the linguistic phonics centers in a Western alphabet. It's often the picture center of the brain. The dyslexic kid is also getting activity in the pictures. And yet if you grow up your whole life translating symbols and pictures to meaning, and my doctorate's in semiotics, and I see Scott Ness, who also did a doctorate in semiotics, we had to translate symbols to meaning.
Mhm.
And we had to learn that, early on. You could recognize the McDonald's sign from the Burger King sign, and you knew it meant, salty, fat food. But somehow, maybe in 550 BC, we started reading left to right, and we became left-brained people, and we're not seeing the whole picture. And yet, if you grow up always trying to see the whole picture, are you better off in physics and imaginary numbers? I don't know the answer to that question, but do you see something different in the way the Chinese
Well,
students look at the big
I
picture?
mean, very early on in my studies of neuroeducation, that came up, the pictorial of kanji and kanja, the differences there. And it's why we always incorporate, as I said earlier, visual vocabularies where the kids create their own little symbols to help them recall content.
Okay.
Yeah, so
We have two questions in 5 minutes. So from Andrew, how could board games and things like that help? He's created a board game to teach about the Bible. People seem to really like it, especially middle schoolers. Do you have kids creating board games? Do you recreating? Has that been something you've worked on at all, or?
Well, I mean, teachers are doing all kinds of things in arts integration, but a board game would be a great example of adding the visual element, adding fun, adding competition.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that.
Dopamine.
Yeah, a
Okay.
little dopamine. Throw that in.
Sarah has a question. What ideas could we use to apply this concept to young homeschool children?
So I think everything that I've talked about can be applied. I just attended in DC a conference on what they're calling microschooling, and it includes homeschooling, and then pods of people who are, it's not like a parent with a child, it's like a group of, a small group of parents. So microschools, homeschools, and that's an area that we really want to connect with because, they are passionate about education. They also recognize that traditional education isn't working for their kids for whatever reason. And yeah, we are really looking toward helping, that initiative move forward.
Sure. And I like the idea of the fashion show, or, what if every 7 weeks the kids cook a dinner and do a show in a microschool? Dinner and a show. One last question. How could school districts lever the Medici effect to grow, broaden, and use brain-targeted teaching? I'm not sure what the Medici effect is. Other than they were the rich bankers of Florence who kind of ran the world underneath it.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to answer that, but I will say that, school districts are coming around. Later on this week, one of the larger school districts in Maryland contacted me and asked me if I could do professional development for their whole district.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, some school districts are pretty traditional and others want to move forward and meet the needs of the whole child. So I'm there to help.
And they can find you where?
mmhardiman@jhu.edu.
And we will post your paper to give them the hard facts so they have the why behind the what in case they have to convince somebody that the arts shouldn't be peripheral, they need to be integrated, and you'll have more attention, more retention, more collaboration, more creativity, more confidence, more competence, and more Marielle. Thank you so much.
One more thing, braintargetedteaching.org.
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 Thank you so much. Next week, we have Annie Patel, author of Music, Language, and the Brain. And we have Oscar-winning Yuval Ron Music. And we're going to talk about music, language, and the brain, and how we can use music and leverage that with a neural understanding. Thank you so much.
I